I never craved applause. I didn't need plaques or public shoutouts, just results. That's what drove me. At 33, I was the lead systems engineer at one of the fastest growing tech manufacturing firms in the city. I'd created a streamlined testing protocol that cut product defects by 42%, reduced turnaround time by half, and made the VP look like a visionary. Of course, no one mentioned my name in the press release. The credit went to Derek, our project manager, and, not coincidentally, the son of our vice president. I watched him pitch my diagrams on slides I'd built, wearing a smug smile that never once broke into a thank you. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself it was the team that mattered. I believed that good work would speak for itself, that integrity would somehow win in the end. But over time, I began to realize this place didn't run on merit. It ran on bloodlines and alliances. Derek had a habit of surrounding himself with yes-men and bootlickers, and I was a threat. I wasn't political. I didn't play golf with the board. I didn't post shiny team photos on LinkedIn. I just delivered flawlessly. But flawless, it turned out, was threatening. The whispers started during the third quarter. I noticed that Derek was getting oddly specific in his suggestions, comments on work he shouldn't have seen. Some of my documentation went missing. A test batch I had locked for review was somehow altered and then flagged. When I approached IT to track access logs, they stalled. Security upgrades, they said. And then I was informed that a peer review would be conducted on my recent performance. That was the first time I felt it, the shift, the quiet tightening of nooses, the slow erasure of credit. Still, I stayed silent. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't call my old college friends. I just worked. Stayed late, documented everything, every email, every code commit, every test result. I didn't know how deep the game went, but something told me I was already inside it. And the worst part? I had built this machine, this system of checks and balances, this framework of quality. And now they were turning it against me. The review came down like a formality, thinly veiled and wrapped in corporate buzzwords. Alignment check, they called it. But I saw it for what it was, a trap. Derek had quietly recruited 2 new engineers fresh out of grad school. On paper, they were there to assist me with workload. In practice, they shadowed my every move, copied my methods, and sent status reports directly to him, bypassing our normal workflow. One even had the audacity to ask for access to my design archives, citing Derek's approval. I refused. That's when the tone started to shift. Suddenly, deadlines were moved forward without notice. Meetings were scheduled without me, then later used to accuse me of being uninvolved. I began to receive passive-aggressive emails about my lack of collaboration, citing incidents I couldn't even recall, because they'd never happened. Then came the system bugs. Small, infrequent at first, misnamed files, overwritten test logs, a missing piece of code here and there. Enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to prove sabotage. I stayed late to restore backups, fix what was broken, and silently logged every error. Derek, meanwhile, was thriving. He gave presentations about team resilience and agile success, all while feeding half-truths to upper management. I watched from the shadows, trying not to let it get under my skin, but I knew this wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a takedown. One night, past 11 p.m., I stayed behind to rerun final validation tests before a major product release. I found a string of last-minute edits in the source files, ones I didn't authorize. Worse, they introduced critical flaws. If pushed live, they would have caused product failure within weeks. It hit me then. They were framing me, slowly, strategically. Derek wasn't just stealing credit, he was building a case. A paper trail that led straight to my door. I locked the server access, created a mirror image of every audit log I could find, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I backed up everything to an encrypted drive and took it home. Because this wasn't just about my job anymore, it was war. It happened faster than I expected, but slower than it should have. 2 weeks after I discovered the tampered code, I received a calendar invite titled Performance Evaluation Review, Mandatory Attendance. No details, no agenda, just a time, a room, and the names of 4 people. Derek, HR Director Marcia, Legal Counsel, and the VP of Engineering. I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I wore my usual shirt, carried my quiet demeanor, and walked in with a copy of the encrypted drive tucked into my laptop case, just in case. They didn't even pretend to be subtle. Concerns have been raised regarding inconsistencies in your recent work, Marcia began, eyes downcast like she wasn't fully sold on the script. Specifically, the integrity of last month's prototype files. Derek sat across the table, arms folded, expression cold, not smug, calculated. He didn't look at me once. They presented a report full of manipulated data, version histories that didn't match, timestamps that were doctored, emails I never sent. One chart even showed my system access logging in during a weekend I was verifiably out of state at a family funeral. It was airtight because Derek had spent months building the lie. I could have defended myself right then, pulled out the logs, cross-verified timestamps, revealed the backup files, but I didn't, because if I fought back in their room, on their terms, they would twist it. They would say I was defensive, that I was not a team player. I'd lose, and I knew it. So instead, I did what they didn't expect. I nodded, silently, closed the folder in front of me and said one sentence. Thank you for the opportunity to serve. That night, I walked out of the building with my final paycheck, a cardboard box, and my name erased from every internal document within 24 hours. Derek got promoted 2 days later. They thought it was over. They thought I'd vanish. What they didn't know was that I had already laid my own foundation. The drive in my bag held every version, every file, every test result they had tried to corrupt, and more importantly, proof of who really made the breakthroughs that pushed this company forward. They had taken everything from me. But what they left behind was the evidence that would one day take everything from them. 3 months after I was let go, I attended our university's 10-year alumni gathering. I almost didn't go. What would I say? Hi, I'm the guy who just got booted from his dream job for a project I created and got blamed for. But something about the invitation felt like an escape from the wreckage. So I went. No expectations, no plans, just a quiet need to see familiar faces. That's where I ran into Linda Tran. She was standing by the refreshment table pouring iced tea, exactly like the kind of scene you'd miss if you blinked, but I didn't blink. Hey, long time. She smiled. And in that moment, the memories rushed in, late-night study groups, her sketches in the margins of engineering notebooks, the way she used to laugh when I overcomplicated things. She'd just come back from a master's program abroad, something in industrial operations and venture innovation, and apparently she'd been recently brought into her family's company. Her family. I didn't connect it until she mentioned her father. Chairman Tran, founder and board chair of our former company. My jaw must have twitched because she caught it immediately. What? She asked. You've heard of him? I hesitated, then told her everything. Not angrily, not to play the victim. Just the facts, the work, the sabotage, the performance review, the silence. Linda didn't interrupt once. No pity in her eyes. Just sharp, quiet attention. When I finished, she said nothing for a long time. Then finally, do you still have your original designs? I nodded. Good, she said, because if even half of what you told me is true, someone upstairs is either blind or complicit. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to. 2 days later, she texted, I showed my dad. He didn't know. He wants to meet. And just like that, the lie they built around me began to unravel. I had been exiled in silence, erased by cowards. But now, someone who mattered had started to listen. The meeting with Chairman Tran wasn't held in some towering boardroom or high-rise glass office. It was at a modest family restaurant he'd been frequenting for 20 years, one with faded wooden booths and a single ceiling fan that creaked with every turn. "I built my company from nothing," he said, stirring his coffee slowly, eyes fixed on mine. "And if someone like you can be forced out under my watch, then maybe I've let it grow too far from its roots." I didn't speak much. I let my files do the talking. Linda had forwarded him the encrypted backup, version histories, test logs, time-stamped commits, even meeting notes with metadata. When I handed over a flash drive with the originals, he didn't even blink. He already knew it was real. What he didn't know was how deep it went. He asked me one question that stuck with me. "Why didn't you fight back when they fired you?" I answered honestly. Because in their game, truth doesn't matter. It's about who controls the narrative. He nodded like he'd been waiting to hear those words. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing. I assumed he'd dropped it. Maybe politics, maybe protection. I was already applying elsewhere, trying to let go of what I couldn't change. Then one morning, Derek's name hit the news feed. Not in a press release this time. Internal investigation launched into procurement irregularities, it said. Anonymous sources cited fraudulent subcontractor contracts, suspicious bonus structures, and inflated R&D budgets. Behind the scenes, Linda filled me in. Her father had quietly assigned a forensic audit team, independent, off the books. They traced shell vendors linked to Derek's cousin, invoices signed off without verification, product flaws that had been buried under false QA reports. Every thread unraveled back to him, and the final blow. A confidential email Derek sent to the VP, joking about how easy it was to clean up after that engineer's mess. They called it mismanagement in public, but behind closed doors, the board saw it for what it was, a cover-up. The man who took credit for my work was now fighting for his own reputation, and failing. Justice hadn't roared into the room, it whispered. But it was loud enough. It didn't make the headlines, but inside the company walls, it was an earthquake. Derek was suspended pending investigation. The VP, his father, was relieved of operational duties. That was the company's way of avoiding the word fired. But everyone knew. The whispers in the hallway weren't even whispers anymore. Linda sent me a quiet message. "You should see this." Attached was a confidential audit report. It was all there, fabricated vendor contracts, doctored test reports, and a string of performance bonuses Derek had approved for himself under different departments. He'd used subcontractors who didn't exist, funneled company funds into side projects, and worst of all, he had compromised the final quality testing on the very product that built the company's last record-breaking quarter. The damage went beyond money. One batch of compromised units had already shipped overseas, faulty components, falsified inspections. What could have become a global recall was now a crisis in waiting. Chairman Tran called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. 2 hours later, Linda called me, her voice calm but sharp. "He's done," she said. "They found out everything. The board wants to make it right, and they want to talk to you." I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just stared out the window for a long time, letting it all wash over me. The next morning, I stepped back into the building that had once erased me. Some looked away, some nodded, pretending they hadn't watched me get pushed out, but a few, just a few, gave me a look I'll never forget. Respect. At the boardroom, Chairman Tran stood and motioned for me to sit. "We need someone to restore trust in the engineering division," he said. "Someone who doesn't play games." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a formal offer. Head of engineering. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even redemption. It was something quieter, stronger, recognition. I looked around that room at the faces who had once signed off on my termination. Some had changed, some were new, But I wasn't here to correct the past. I was here to build a better future. One blueprint at a time. The office they gave me was the same one Derek used to occupy. Same windows, same desk, same view of the skyline he probably thought he owned. But I didn't sit in his chair right away. I spent my first week walking the floor. I reintroduced myself to the junior engineers, the same ones who had been told I was uncooperative. I found the quiet technicians in the testing lab, the tired analysts in quality control, the coders who had once forwarded Derek's requests with eyes full of guilt. I didn't blame them. I just listened. We rewrote protocols from scratch. I tore down Derek's convoluted approval systems and replaced them with transparent reviews. No more closed-door promotions, no more favors passed under the table. It wasn't about punishment, it was about cleansing a culture poisoned by ego. Linda dropped by often, not as the chairman's daughter, but as someone who genuinely cared. We had lunch in the cafeteria like we used to do in college, paper trays, inside jokes, and talk about the future. One afternoon, she left behind a note under my coffee mug. They tried to bury you, but they didn't know you were a seed. It stayed in my wallet ever since. Performance rebounded within 2 quarters. We caught the faulty batch just in time before international partners filed complaints. I personally led the task force to redesign the product with full transparency, restoring both quality and trust. And then the most unexpected thing happened. A few of the board members who once backed Derek approached me privately. "We were wrong," one said. "We mistook silence for weakness." I didn't respond, because silence, when used wisely, is a weapon sharper than words. They offered me stock options, a seat at strategic meetings. I accepted the responsibility, not the power. My purpose wasn't to rise. I'd already done that by standing back up. And when Derek's name finally vanished from the internal directory, no one cheered. There was no need. The company didn't need revenge. It needed restoration. And I was there to build it. One team, one truth, one quiet act of integrity at a time. 6 months into the role, everything looked different, but felt still, calmer, steadier, not quieter because I was ignored, but quieter because I was finally heard, without having to shout. The hallway that once echoed with politics and posturing now echoed with progress. Ideas flowed freely. Recognition came naturally, and when my team succeeded, I made sure the credit went exactly where it belonged. That was the promise I made to myself the day I took that seat. One Friday evening, long after most had gone home, I stood by the window of my office, a mug of black coffee in hand. The city lights below blinked like a breathing machine, steady, alive. Behind me, on the wall, hung a framed prototype sketch, the very one Derek had stolen credit for. Linda had found it buried in old internal emails and had it framed without telling me. She walked in just then, carrying 2 boxes of takeout. "You're still working," she teased. "Just thinking," I replied, smiling. Hard to believe I almost walked away from this place. She looked at me with that knowing glance, the one that said she understood more than words ever could. "You didn't walk away," she said. "You just let them think you did." That night, we ate in the office. No suits, no titles. Just 2 old friends who had survived something ugly and turned it into something meaningful. A week later, at the company's annual town hall, Chairman Tran gave a rare public address. He spoke about integrity, second chances, and the danger of blind loyalty to power over principle. Then, without fanfare, he invited me on stage. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. I simply said, "Thank you for trusting the work," even when the story said otherwise. Applause came, not thunderous, but honest. I stepped off that stage not as someone who'd won revenge, but as someone who'd restored something far more important: respect. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. They didn't just try to take my career, they tried to erase my worth. But worth doesn't live on nameplates or performance reviews. It lives in quiet acts of truth and the people who never stop believing in it.